Hi there, and welcome back to the Explaining History podcast. And this is the update edition. So we're talking about things that are contemporary, things that are really important, things that are currently taking our attention, and rightly so. And later on, I will be looking at more the sort of the standard explaining history stuff that I tend to do. But of course this week it's really important to talk about the repeal of Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court ruling in principle that Roe versus Wade, the Supreme Court case that saw the legalization of abortion in America very clearly facing overturn. A majority of Supreme Court justices, thanks really to the process during the Trump years of packing the Supreme Court with reactionary conservative judges that Trump believed was his way of ensuring legality for many of his illegal acts. This didn't actually exactly work out for Trump, because the Supreme Court wasn't necessarily the institution that would simply rubber stamp any of Trump's actions, but the legacy of Trump, assuming he doesn't actually come back in 2024, is this incredibly right-wing toxic Supreme Court that will hand out judgment after judgment like this. And the overturn of Roe versus Wade, which since 1973 has been a prize of the American evangelical Christian right, and has been and the gradual repeal of abortion access, not necessarily the right to abortion, but abortion access in America since the 1970s. Has been largely a kind of a successful campaign fought by a very well financed, very politically connected and well organised body of right wing and Christian organisations. There are huge implications that go with this, obviously. The first of which, and I think it's important for listeners who aren't in the US to appreciate the international scope of the situation. The evangelical churches and organisations in America that have pioneered the overturn of Roe versus Wade are very well connected to their counterparts in the rest of the world, who will obviously be enormously emboldened right now. There are in plenty of other countries evangelical groups who view abortion as kind of a moral obscenity and want to place pressure to have abortion made illegal, criminalised. It seems to be in most instances, in European countries, in places like Canada or Australia, unthinkable that would occur. And there are very specific political, social, and kind of historical contexts to the repeal of Roe versus Wade in America. So the chances of this replicating itself in another setting are perhaps limited, but it was considered 20 years ago inconceivable that we would have reached this moment by most people of a kind of a liberal persuasion in America. These rights, even though they were the product of a Supreme Court ruling and not from primary legislation or a constitutional amendment, these rights were seen as kind of inalienable. Part of the reason why they can be overturned is because there is, an argument has been put forth that this is essentially law made by judges and not by politicians. Of course, the American evangelical right knows full well that if this matter returns to states, then there will be numerous states, mainly in the South and the Midwest, that will be happy to ban abortion completely and utterly. If you go back far enough in time, perhaps back to Barry Goldwater in the early 60s, and more successfully Nixon in 68, the weaponizing of Christianity and kind of moral causes. Nixon obviously used to talk of the silent majority or the moral majority in American politics. A lot of this was really a device to help the Republican Party build a new political base in the era of civil rights. Nixon was able to look at the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement, and the counterculture towards the end of the 60s and say to Americans, a majority of Americans who were baffled at least by the counterculture and felt threatened by the very modest gains that black Americans made during the 1960s, and say, ultimately this country seems pretty unrecognizable to you guys, and this is a fearful time for you, a fearful place. You seem to have lost control of your country completely and utterly. Originally, the whole point of this was to kind of weaponize dog whistle racism. In '68, Nixon talks a lot about crime, and the wink that he gives to his voter base, his new voter base, and Republicans had since the Civil War, because of the legacy of Lincoln, failed to acquire a voting base in the South. Nixon managed it, and managed to pull off this kind of Republican revolution in the South. And the thing that is unspoken is that by crime he means the threat of black people to white people, and the implication that that's who commits crimes, isn't it? To the kind of the racist listener. So part of the this kind of process in the late 60s and early 70s was the politicization of Christianity. Christianity had, to some degree, always been a political force in America, but in order to mobilize evangelical Christianity en masse and to create a new sense of Americanness in the South and the Midwest, based around whiteness, based around Christianity, and based around moral values that were drawn from particular readings of the Bible, and based around it's essentially a kind of a version of white Christian American nationalism. This was Nixon's kind of beast, and the thing that helped Nixon kind of redefine the Republican Party. Had it not been for the minor inconvenience of Watergate, he would no doubt have been served for 2 full terms, largely on the basis of decided that he was restoring a Christian, militant, armed white America in at the height of the Vietnam War, at the height of America's humiliations, and at the height of a moment where the idea of what America is highly, highly contested. You have you have different ethnic minorities and different cultural and social groups claiming that their version of America is an entirely valid one. So the idea was that the time was right for Nixon to weaponize white Christianity as a kind of a version of Americanness, and the various moral causes that the ecosystem of Christian groups and churches, and later on in the 70s and 80s televangelists prioritized, abortion becomes a kind of like a lightning rod within all of this, and it was a great way of attacking the nascent second wave feminist movement of the 60s and 70s, and the women's liberation movement of the mid to late 1970s. So there's what we see now has a long kind of history in America's culture wars, and in a way, the whole existence of Trump, the whole point of Trump is was as a kind of a battering ram for the American right to wage its culture wars with, and Trump is a more than happy participant in this and a kind of progenitor of much of these debates. He doesn't really kind of invent anything himself, just simply kind of is not a man of original thought or original thinking or original ideas. These were cultural debates that long preceded him, that he was more than willing to whip up for his own purposes, as somebody who understands television above all else, and is kind of, when he's not being a con artist, understands the power of celebrity. He was able to weaponize controversy. The difficulty now that that in some ways the American right, this kind of broad coalition of the Republican Party and its evangelical and exceedingly wealthy millionaire and billionaire backers face, is that they now have this epic historic success that about 60 to 70% of the entire country doesn't really want. The ability to achieve this overturning of Roe versus Wade isn't reflected in its actual popularity. They have they've achieved a victory which of the American Republican and conservative movement will now be forced to fight tooth and nail for, even though there are Republican voters that wish to retain their right to have an abortion. The evangelical movement is but a small subsection of the wider Republican movement, or the Republican voting base, and not everything that is proposed by the evangelical movement is necessarily particularly popular per se or at all. So when the implications of the overturn of Roe versus Wade become apparent, and the reason why Roe versus Wade was found in favour of by the Supreme Court in the first place anyway, was because the right to abortion was based around the right to privacy. And if there is one of the things that Roe versus Wade achieved was it held together a plethora of similar rights. Now, as far as kind of progressives in general are concerned, the great fear is that rights to gay marriage, rights to homosexuality at all, the legality of homosexuality at all might be threatened. trans rights, and a host of other possible civil rights implications might well be threatened in states where there is a reactionary majority of voters. There is the possibility with the Democrats having the House, the Senate, and the presidency, of them being able to pass primary legislation in order to enshrine Roe versus Wade in law. Whether this will happen is difficult to say. There are already the two dissenting, to put it politely, Democrats, Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, are already making noises that they will obstruct. And of course, the difficulty with passing any piece of primary legislation like this is that you need to get rid of or abolish the great Republican tool of the filibuster. And if the filibuster isn't properly dealt with and removed finally from its kind of eternal role in American politics of undermining any progressive step forward, it seems unlikely that this piece of legislation will ever see the light of day. Joe Biden himself, who did a very good job of convincing the left of the Democrat Party, Sanders supporters, etc., that he was interested in progressive politics, Biden himself has said that he sees no reason for getting rid of the filibuster and actually sees the removal of the filibuster as being basically a bad thing. So we're left with this spectacle. It's rather like kind of the existence of large numbers of firearms in America and the frequency of mass shootings and that sort of thing. We're left with this kind of curious spectacle in the United States, whereby you have a country which is at the pinnacle of modernity, the pinnacle in some ways of technological achievement, and as Russia sinks ever backwards and into its own kind of feudal kind of second tier state, and as China presents perhaps a less credible opposition to American hegemony, we might well once again see America becoming, as it was in the 90s and early 2000s, this lone global hyperpower. However, in the midst of that, the very basic rights to the sanctity of the body and of human privacy are under threat, and seemingly rational progressive forces seem to be kind of unable to do anything about it whatsoever. And herein lies this great paradox with the United States, one that's mirrored in the huge problems in the US healthcare sector and the difficulty that the seemingly intractable problem of attempts to create a free at the point of use healthcare service, which most of the modern countries in some way, shape or form enjoy. The implications for the rest of the world, as I said, are stark. The organisations and wealthy backers who have managed to overturn Roe versus Wade will now be immensely emboldened. Perhaps they won't succeed in Europe, but they will try. Of that you must be absolutely certain. And wherever you are, if you're not in the US, watch the media that you consume and look for the messages that will no doubt be kind of dropped into newspaper columns and leaders in here and in op-eds on TV shows and radio and podcasts, because there will be an attempt to make the argument first for the curbing and reduction of abortion rights, and then perhaps an outright ban similar to Roe versus Wade. These things often tend to follow. And also, this might be a huge and important moment for the women's movement inside America and beyond. It's difficult to say at the moment. There has been, doesn't seem to have been the kind of spontaneous mass organising that happened when Trump was first elected in 2016. But give it time. It's only been a day or two, and no doubt there is a flurry of activity amongst the women's movements in America to organise some form of resistance. Okay, well, listen, I'm going to leave the update there. We're going to be coming back to that hopefully later in the week. Apologies, I've done fewer updates this week because, again, I've been suffering from long COVID and it's been kind of tiring. But, I'll get over that. Thanks very much, everybody. I hope you find this useful, and we'll be getting back to some regular history in a moment. All the best. Thanks. Bye-bye.